this is the fifth time I've done this talk. I keep changing every time. Keep myself interested. So the story is I started a new company about 13 months ago. And part of that process was we have old legacy software written for the most part pretty poorly, as some of the people who work with me can attest. So I had to find a way to not have to deal with old crappy code when I'm writing stuff. So I'm like, I wanted a way where we can add new features, new functionality to our existing code base without breaking it. Because asking for a rewrite is very unlikely in most organizations. And you don't get new projects very often. So it's like, you want to do cool things, you have to figure a way to get into the old dying things around it, right? So this is kind of the culmination of that over the last 13 months, kind of finding the right libraries, finding ways to improve the process, and improve the productivity and the actual enjoyment of people who are writing the code. Because sometimes code, especially working with old code, can be a pain and no one wants to do it. So you kind of want to make that a little more enjoyable so people actually want to use it. So I have a repo, GitHub repo for this. So all the code that kind of drives the slides and actual full working solution is all in there. For people who aren't Microsoft people, it's an ASP.NET web service behind it. So it's pretty easy to up and run, but there's always, I can always show, there's like links in there how to do other things if you need to. You can always ask me if you want, if there's an issue of how to do certain things. So when I started doing this talk, I was like you said, if you're an expert at something, share it. I wouldn't be able to share anything when I started. Like, I'm not an expert at all at anything, I don't think, but I'm trying to become one. So, but I don't think it matters. I think the things I'm trying to show and the things that I'm trying to demonstrate is trying to be as objective as possible and for you guys to get a feel for it, see if it would work for you. And it's all about, I did research, found people to actually, who the right people to listen to, who the wrong people aren't to listen to, of course, in my subjective opinion. So not an authority, but I've tried to research and find authorities. So I just steal their ideas and present it as my own. That was the whole go.
You could work at Apple.
Yeah. Perfect. So usually I start off with this, and I talk just kind of lay out where I am. I don't know if you've seen like the Dreyfus model of knowledge. There's arguments back and forth whether it's useful or not. But basically, if you identify yourself at a certain level or you identify developers at a certain level, you have to approach them differently. If you have an expert programmer, you don't want to give them too much direction. First of all, you're going to give them terrible direction. If they're an expert, they don't need it. And first of all, it's going to kill their willingness to do interesting things. So the kind of higher, lower you go, the more authority you give those people. And so expert levels, usually people say they're experts. I think it's a rare thing. I think it's less than 5% of people usually are. And I'm trying to become one, but it's very difficult. Especially in the front end world. It's like, I'm awesome at Knockout.js for 2 years and no one uses it anymore. So there's kind of three parts to the talk. One I care about most is reactive Flux, but you have to get there, right? So it's not, you don't want to go the old model of not using modules and stuff like that to build everything out. You really want to use that and leverage it. You need tools along the way. So you need Node.js to support your front end building of code, and you want Webpack to help support that. Anyone heard of or used Webpack before? Anyone heard of React? Nice. Anyone use React? Sweet. Like more than actually write an app with it, like a full app? You did a little bit, right? A little bit. That's fine. Okay, cool. That's good. Because then if I'm wrong, you guys will be able to tell me. It's perfect. And the last part is kind of strategies, like how I did it and how I started using it. Because I had to get buy-in to actually start because we had no developers trained in it. So we had to take some risk at first and how we kind of worked our way through that. So that's kind of my motivation. I've said before, I alluded to it before. Misery, working legacy code. You want to be able to make isolated components that live on their own, that don't affect the rest of your code base. Besides the web service you need to drive it. So the first thing we started playing with before we picked a library was we had a lot of terrible JavaScript. I'm sure everyone has seen some terrible JavaScript before, right? Almost all of it. But people think that's special for JavaScript. That is not special for JavaScript. Not at all. So the first thing we started doing was linting our code. So we turned a linter on for our legacy JavaScript. We just said, okay, let's ignore that, because that's never going to happen, right? Like you're going to see that line of thousands of errors, and like that's never going to get tackled. So we kind of started that and said, okay, let's create a new kind of area where our stuff's going to go. We can't start from scratch, and then everything new goes here, and we lint the hell out of that. That was basically our approach. Anyone heard of ESLint? Yeah? Some of us? People use JSLint or JSLint, and ESLint's the new one. We started off with JSLint, because JSLint you can't customize that much, so we wanted to kind of slowly bring rules in. And ESLint, the big advantage we did that over JSLint was it supports ES6 or ES2015, like linting and React linting is what we get into. And the obvious thing with linting is discover problems before you roll to production, right? Just another way to find those issues. Open source JavaScript, like it would be a pay JavaScript utility. I don't know that many that aren't open source. So like what? I think Meteor like you have to pay for or something like that. Yeah. No, it's free. Get on there. So each rule, so basically, if you've used linting rules, usually they're configurable in some way. And so the way ESLint goes about it is there's 3 levels. There's turned off, I don't care for this rule. And there's 1 and there's 2. So 1 is a warning. 2 is obviously error. Actually stops your bundling and stops your build mapping until you fix it. The warning that don't use, because all it is noise. Like if you don't fix it, you're always going to have these little warnings. Yes, it'll allow you to bundle, but it's really annoying. It's good for temporary, you still want to bundle, but if you really want to get through that, you can always put like an ESLint ignore around your code while you're working through something. Yeah. And you can actually create rules and formatters even at runtime. You can create your own custom rules, which is I haven't played with that feature, but to me it's enough that what we've added is like so. People are like, everyone's complaining. All the developers were complaining like a lot when we first started bringing this in, because of course it's so annoying. This thing keeps yelling at me. The point is, it's supposed to be annoying. So those are some kind of like the configuration for it. And it was hard to see, so I just kind of talk through it. So if you have like an if statement and you're returning something, and an else statement to return something, like you don't need an else statement, just forget it, just return it. It helps you get through that. But stuff like cyclomatic complexity, I don't know, it's a very complicated word, but cyclomatic complexity is how difficult kind of to read your method, your function is, or whatever. Basically, it's like all the conditional branches you have or ways through the path of your code increases the complexity. So you can dial that in, you can set what your complexity level is, and so if you have like a switch statement with like 30 things in it, it's going to obviously yell at that. Or if you have lots of like nested ifs and stuff like that. So it's pretty good for catching those things early and keeping your code base consistent. Now, Webpack. So when I first started, I used Browserify. I don't know if anyone's used Browserify before. And it was going well for a while, and I kind of ran into some things with some of the way they handle source maps. If you know what source maps are, if you have like all kinds of modules, when you look in debug tools, you actually can go to each independent as its own file to help your debug process, so it's not one large 80,000 line JavaScript file. It breaks it up into the original files it came from. So we found some issues with it, and I found that the guy who created it, he went with the idea of, I'm going to create this main bundler and rely on people to create all these little extra add-ins for it. But unfortunately, some of those add-ins came and went. Support wasn't always the greatest. So the guy who created Webpack, I can't remember his name now, but he started using it. He's like, you know what, I'm going to make my own thing that takes care of everything and handle your whole process for you. Because building and bundling, all that stuff, that should be a pretty straightforward process. You want it to stay out of the way, right? It's not one of the things you want to think about very often. You want to set it up, make some minor modifications, and kind of deal with it that way. You don't have to worry about it too often. So with any bundler, with any like module thing, like Runt or Gulp can do a lot of these things. You can lint, you can compile this, run your unit test, concatenate, unify. None of that's substantial or great, but for people who aren't doing those things, Webpack can do that all for you. The less stuff's actually really cool because you can require less things as modules, which is very interesting. So if you want to use only certain less files in your code, you can just require the ones you need. And so you don't have to load a giant like CSS, and all that stuff out when you load your app. So other advantages are you can optimize common code quite easily. So if you have a bunch of single-page apps, it'll find the things in common between them and create a separate JavaScript file for it. So if people go into different parts of your app that have different single-page apps, but have a lot of the same common code, they won't have to reload that part. They'll be cached and everything. So it helps with that kind of stuff. The other thing is the sync loading. So if you have a single-page app with routing, you can actually make it so it won't fetch the JavaScript relevant for those routes until you actually go to those routes. Because the single-page apps are great, except for initial load, right? The whole thing spinning while you're waiting for the app to come. Once it loads, it's fantastic, but sometimes that can take a while. Especially with my organization, we have to support IE8. But the good thing, I know it's so terrible, but everything you see here runs in IE8. Like React, all that stuff, all with shims and everything, runs perfectly fine. So if you have to support it, I feel for you, but I feel your pain. I do the same thing. It covers all your web developer needs, like I said, for the most part. Let's say something pause less. I already said that. I thought it was the next slide. So sync loading that was the cool thing for me. And then just the basic Webpack commands. There's obviously more than that. And I'll show you in my code base. I actually have different config files for your different environments. Whether you're in dev mode or you want a debug mode to a server for testing, which is a little bit different than what you watch. And then production mode, which obviously mangles and minifies, all that good stuff. So yeah, this is the annoying train message that everyone got. I wish it was that picture though, it'd be much more fun. Like an animated GIF of him doing that. But everyone complained that shouldn't be that part of the presentation. That's when people start complaining to me about this stupid train message is so annoying. You're like, good, fix your code then. You don't have to worry about it. So that's why I kind of alluded to that. I found there was too many extra. I think Browserify, like I know recently they've made some significant improvements, but I'm happy, so I don't really see it's not worth it for me to go back to it. Because Webpack is really doing well, and a lot of the major React stuff is using Webpack. There's a few open source projects that are using Browserify still. There's actually a React podcast that had a few episodes. They actually had a debate with some of the main React people in the community of which ones that you should use. That's pretty interesting. So CommonJS, everyone know what CommonJS modules are? Everyone? Sweet, okay. So CommonJS modules came about from when Node first came, and that was the way you did your server-side JavaScript with those kind of modules. The web, we had to rely on stuff like Require.js, which I don't know how many people use Require.js or are fans of Require.js. I hated it because it was like, when you had all these dependencies, just a comma separated of all the dependencies you had, it was just always really annoying to work with. But, so CommonJS wasn't really good for the web because it didn't support the asynchronous loading that the web needs. So that's why things like Browserify and Webpack came along to help make your bundles so you can do the same type of module system you and your backend if you're using Node apps as in your front end. If you have any questions, don't be afraid to stop me. No problem doing that. So CommonJS is basically that. So you define a function and you export it and you just require it through relative pathing where you can make your own kind of custom Node modules if you want. If you want to do like an enterprise NPM or something, you can do the same thing where you can start centralizing some of your code that you use amongst more of your apps instead of having to rely on, because we all know relative pathing isn't always the most fun thing in the world, especially when we want to move files around, because we don't usually get our taxonomies right the first time. So yeah, so you just basically do that, you require it and you use it. So it allows you to actually really make small, isolated, easy to understand modules. So Babel. Has anyone used Babel before? One person? No one else? This is great. I like this. I love Babel. It's awesome. So Babel was called 6 to 5 before. There's an ES6 to ES5 compiler. So the guy realized that's not the greatest name in the world because every time ECMAScript creates a new thing, he's going to have to name his company differently. So he's like, maybe I need like a name that's a little more timeless. So Babel is basically that. It's a JavaScript compiler. And they use next generation JavaScript today. So IE8, you can use ES6 modules, ES6 kind of style code in IE8. Not that you should want to, but you can. And it's a compiler for JSX and React. So React is a JSX, which we'll get into. It actually compiles that, so you don't need an external compiler. Like React created a compiler for their React, but you don't need it anymore. Babel will take care of that all for you. So I have a couple examples, some ES6 kind of additions to the language. They're trying to fix JavaScript because we know it's not perfect. The big one that I like the most is the arrows and less till this. So I don't know if people have used, I know Java has a new down C# and a lot of functional programming has the idea of like these kind of arrow functions. So arrow functions, when you're using a map, you can do your map function in line with that very nicely. I'm not sure if everyone's used map functions. What map functions basically are, you have one array, you want to turn it into something else. Map's going to be a thing that iterates over every element in that array and turns it into the other array. So if you want to make odd numbers, that's how you would do that. You take each element in the evens array, you add one to it, and that odds array is a whole new array with the computed values from it. And so statement bodies. So the good thing about this is if you use this inside of that arrow function, it operates as you expect. It's the same as the code within the same area, which most JavaScript developers have experienced some pain with this operator, especially start using constructor functions and all that fun stuff. That can be a real weird one sometimes. So that's kind of helped the language a bit. And so again, you can write this now and it'll work. Losing some of my audience here. So enhance object literals. They also enhance classes like ES6. I don't like them. I'm not a big fan of we do classical inheritance of JavaScript, like just to make. I just did a talk on this yesterday with one person who was there. I don't. It's like the whole look Java C# people. It's the same thing over here. Don't look at it. Which really there's other ways, better ways I think to do it than with constructor functions and the basic classical inheritance. So they enhance object literals to do things like dynamic property names, computed ones, and so that I don't know if anyone noticed the weirdness of. So if people aren't familiar with the new ECMAScript, ES6, the toString, you don't have to do :function anymore, or function toString. It does that for you. It puts it in there. It'll add it when your transpires. So it's a little less verbose, a little nicer. Like this doesn't seem like a huge deal, but I like it. Yeah.
Just going back to the arrow style function. Like in CoffeeScript, there's the thin arrow and thick arrow. Is there anything like that in ES6 to kind of take the scope of the parent this and put it in the?
No, not that I like. Not that I know of.
Okay.
So I don't
you still
think
have to do var that equals this outside and then do that.
If you do it outside, yeah. Once you use like object create and do something like that to add the context or something.
Well, bind should still be there.
Yeah, bind's still there.
Yeah.
You can still use bind. You can do object create, and if you want to say what things they build it that way, you can. So there's different ways to do it. Like I don't know CoffeeScript, or I've never used CoffeeScript, so I don't know exactly how it goes from that. So then you can shorthand for handler. You don't say handler. Those kind of basic things. Just nice little syntactic sugar, a little richness, makes things a little nicer to read, and I think easier to work with. Scoping, yay! JavaScript does scoping now. Like that's caused lots of pain in junior developers, especially. It's like, what do you mean? I declared the variable down here. Why is it working up here? That's like declaring a thing. The whole idea of hoisting, and so now you have constants and you have let. They didn't touch var because obviously they don't want to affect old code. So what let basically is, it gives you the scope. So then when you have your the scope and the context construct there, you have const x, totally fine, it's its own scope altogether, and then of course you can't override it because it's a constant, and then x is around that outside scope. So again, behind the scenes, it's transpiling to what it would look like today with ES5. But yeah, so it's nice. I think it's easier for especially junior developers to understand. Want me to keep going, or do you want to take a little break, or just keep going through it? I think we're good, right? Are you good with your battery there? Okay, so React. So when React came out, it was kind of stated as just the UI part. So it's the view and so if you have traditional MVC, it's the view and the MVC. So you can keep your existing, most of your apps, if you have a full backbone app, you can keep all your backbone stuff and just replace your views with React. They actually, for ASP.NET, for Microsoft developers, we have ASP.NET MVC. I don't want to say we, so I'm not part of it. But so then they create a port for it so you can do like the server-side React stuff in it. So they did a really good job of making sure things work that way. And then, so the virtual DOM, which we'll kind of get into, what the virtual DOM allows you to do, people who aren't familiar with it, is so you have your actual DOM, right? And DOM mutation is always kind of complicated, kind of expensive. So what they do is they create a kind of shadow copy of the DOM, like as a key-based, object key-based thing. And they'll find, what they basically do, and we'll get into a little more, but is they look for any changes in your state and only update the part of the DOM that actually changed. This is the main idea. And they tell you about a one-way reactive data flow. So it's not like your regular two-way data binding. It usually just kind of wraps around. You create an action which triggers something that comes through and updates your state that way. So the motivation for why React is that whole incremental thing. I can just do one little thing in it, and it won't really affect much. I like that the actual company who created it, which is Facebook, I don't know if I alluded to that already, but Facebook actually uses it for everything they do now, especially in the web. Native is going that way too, because React can do React Native also. But all of Facebook and all of Instagram, I don't know what is happening in the web part of Instagram. I don't know how complicated that must be, but it's a lot of pictures, I guess. And it's all about composition. So you compose your elements together. It's very much like, it's very modular. So you can create really reusable small pieces of code, parts of your view layer that you can share easily amongst different components. And I think it's React Native. So what they did is they realized most of the ideas around React aren't really specific to the web. What they've done is they made the DOM an implementation detail. So you still got to render things to an iPhone, still got to render things to Android. So what they do is they're now separating the actual DOM manipulation part out of the core React library now. So you can use the core React in Android and Facebook, and iPhone, and then you can use a lot of the same code for your web. That doesn't always work because there's native things you want to do. But again, if you just take up that actual rendering part as an implementation detail, you get some freedom with that. So the big thing when it first came out was it was very performant. Not in all cases. Some cases there's other libraries that are better. But for most cases, it's really fast. The virtual DOM diff algorithm, which we'll kind of get into a little bit, runs really quickly and updates like large-scale apps really well. And again, I already alluded not just the web, you have native. And of course, I left this spelling mistake in because there's no such thing as server-side rendering, but there is server-side rendering, which is very similar. And so it allows you to get that whole single page app thing, the initial load, you can render it from the server now in your initial load. So if you have a specific route you even want to do, you can do that with one of the libraries called React Router. It's very much like the Ember router for people who use Ember. And so you can actually load that from the server, like almost nothing for initial load time. So search engine optimization, although Google and stuff is getting better with single page apps and indexing it, but this allows you to easily do that. So we have lots of options, right, in the web, just a million of them. And I'm sure I didn't consider every option. But my main driving thing was small improvements, small changes, that eventually you start taking bigger pieces out and replacing them more and more. So things like Angular and Ember didn't work for me in that way. It's hard to just do a little bit of Ember or a little bit of Angular. From my point of view, from my early investigation with it, it was hard to just be like, let's just do a little Angular. Because it is quite different too. Like if you're a heavy JavaScript developer, it's not like an easy transition like, oh, Angular is pretty much just like how JavaScript is, because it's got a little bit different, right? Like it's a little different the way they implement it. I didn't find the skills transferable. Like if you're an Angular expert, you're not going to be an awesome at core JavaScript necessarily. But yeah, subjective, right? And Durandal is like a lesser known one, but I've used it before I built some very good apps with it. But the guy actually left to join the Angular team. Then he hated where Angular was going, and he left and came back and created Aurelia, which is his new one. So he actually has a blog post. He actually had a blog post why Angular wasn't that great a year before he joined them. Then he had another one saying why they're not great again when he left them, which is kind of funny. I guess maybe he should have listened to himself the first time. The asterisk for Backbone is a lot of companies that were, like a lot of the big JavaScript front-end companies used to use Backbone. That was like the big one at the time. That was like it was the king of the castle for a while. And what they found is there was a natural, easy way to just swap out your Backbone views all with React views. Like that's what Airbnb did. That's what Khan Academy has done. They swapped out their whole view layer, which was all Backbone, to React. So it allows you to kind of do that. And Knockout. So Knockout was great because you can have data binding in IE6, which is good at the time, but it relied on jQuery to do its DOM manipulations. And, it gave you some power, but it was just like, it caused a lot of issues at the same time. The other thing was, like a lot of people, I'm just a follower. And I saw all these people, like on mass scale, migrating to something in the JavaScript world, which doesn't always happen. Like large companies, like Khan Academy is very good at, like, they're well known for understanding JavaScript. They have good courses on it, and they totally went to it. The Backbone was causing issues, and it was, like I said, a natural thing to just swap out the view, bring in React. Airbnb, the same thing. They were a huge Backbone company, all Backbone, and they swapped out their view for React. Yahoo Mail, for all the people who use, anyone have a Yahoo Mail account they use? Never have done it at the talk. Anyone's ever put up their hand to that? Other people are so embarrassed. Anyone who sends me, it's either Simpatico or whatever. It's Rogers, right? Rogers is Yahoo Mail or something. But anytime you get an email from someone, I know they're at least older than me, which is 35. So I know they're at least like 45 that have a Yahoo Mail account. Not that that's old by any stretch of imagination. Flipboard, so people have used Flipboard before. So Flipboard never went to the web because they couldn't do what they wanted. They couldn't get that rich experience with any other library. That's what they said. But they basically did it with React, and they actually open sourced the whole thing they did, how they make Flipboard and how they got to work. GitHub, so issue viewer and add-on text editor are all done in React now. So people have used that. They couldn't get the performance of any other library at the time. Like Ember's improving, Angular's improving, of course. Angular 2 is supposed to be much better. HipChat, Netflix, again, another company that's like known for their engineering, right? Like this whole main Code Academy. Like, you shouldn't do it because these guys are doing it, obviously, but again, authority's not so bad sometimes. So virtual DOM. So again, I kind of explained it a bit. So the way React works is very much like a server-side thing, right? Where it just re-renders the whole. Its idea is it re-renders everything, but doesn't actually render to the DOM. It re-renders in the virtual DOM. So you don't have to worry about like how it's going to affect the components. You just know all your views are going to be re-rendered. And so, but React's going to take care of the part that says we're only going to update the things that actually need to be updated. I'll actually show, if we have the demo working at the time, how it actually manipulates the DOM with like keys and stuff. So it can easily, especially when you have arrays and you have lists, to easily know where, okay, this thing's not in the list anymore, let's remove it from the DOM, or this one should be this higher than this one, or this one should be lower than that one. It's actually kind of cool how it works. Yeah, so only updates to real DOM with changes only. So anything that's small, there's a render method, because it was running a space, basically. But so you can kind of read that quickly, but I don't have to read it for you. Basically, just runs every React component has a render method in it. It has to have a render function. Or else, what was the point of having a view component if it didn't render anything? So it has to have a view, and that's basically what it does. And so it creates a set of changes, and it says then it then applies it. It figures out what changes it needs, then applies it that way. So you can do things, and I'll get into the lifecycle stuff where you can say, I really don't want to even bother with a re-render here, because I know, like if you use, anyone here use Lodash or underscore? Anyone not use Lodash or underscore? So they have, some people didn't do either. That's cool. So Lodash is like totally, like I only started using Lodash and underscore like 2 years ago. I felt like such an idiot for being so late to the game. It's like, it's so helpful, it's amazing. So you can run like a Lodash is equal, and it does a deep equal on your object. So if the properties coming into your render component haven't changed, then return false and only render. You can even get better performance that way. So when we do the comparison. So when JSX, I think it was at FluidConf or something like that, they first showed JSX, every like top like JavaScript thing were like totally making fun of it. Like, what are they doing? Right? Why are they mixing JavaScript, CSS, right, and HTML together? That's insane. I think with Pete Hunt, who's one of the guys who are on the Instagram and Facebook team, he had a good point. He goes, people always thought we were separating concerns by having a CSS file and a JavaScript file and HTML. But really what that is separating technologies. It's the same concern. The concern is I'm trying to present an interface to the user that they're going to work with. So they said, let's rethink this whole thing. So we'll get into the CSS thing and how that's affected. But it allows you, because you always have to have multiple screens open. You have to be like, oh, I need a class here to show that this thing is checked off. So I have to open my CSS file over here, and and I have to put some binding in the HTML. When of course that is the same real thing as that. So Inline Styles is becoming a thing in the React community now. It's not perfect, because you can't do everything. And of course you're reloading a lot of the styles a lot of the time. But for some things it makes sense. So if it's a state change, for the state change thing, you have to have like all these different versions in CSS to handle those things. You have to make sure you're using those, and then if you stop using it, who goes back and cleans up those old classes? Because you can rely on those libraries to say you have unused classes, but I've been burned by those way too many times. And like, why is this page not working? Because the thing is totally erased stuff you didn't want. But with this, you can have state-based inline styles if you want. Again, it's not something you have to do. It's not mandatory, but there's certain cases, I think it's an in-between. It's not ready to replace total CSS. But if you want real, truly reusable components, that you can say, I want this component, you can pass styles to it as properties if you want to. If you really want to do that, it's the only way to make a truly modular component is it is all together. But it's a trade-off. And that's how you basically render it. So actually React News release is a little different than that. You render and you pick whichever node on the DOM you want it to map to. Come on. You with me? So the good thing about JSX is it's JavaScript. So you lint your code. So ESLint has JSX linting. So you can actually lint all your HTML and CSS to make sure it follows the rules you need it to. And you can do type checking, and we'll look at some of those options if you really want to, like an opt-in. And they're testable, so that each component, you can create these very small reusable components, and you run unit tests against them. Facebook created a library called Jest, where it mocks all your dependencies. So when you do your common JS modules and you require, it'll automatically mock those for you. You can opt out of that if you don't want a mocked version of it. But Angular does a very similar thing, right? They make testing a very important part of their process. I think my mouse is dying. So we found it has to be a little different. So when you build React up, you have to think of it the way kind of you're building it. It is like pieces of the Lego in a way. Like you have a wrapping component, like everything's one giant component, and then with all kinds of little components within it nested in it. So if that makes sense, create a static version. Don't add state yet, just create a static version of your page, and then you can figure out, okay, we have our whole app laid out kind of, now we figure out where we put our state. Because state's the hard part. So there's a couple ways that there's state and props are basically the way you keep track of state and pass state around. So props, when you pass props to a child component, that makes that component the owner component of that child component. So you can have a top level approach where you pass your state down. So your child components, all they're getting is the data from its parent to be like, okay, what do I render? That's all I care about. You can make just pure render functions that all they do is take some properties and just render them. And then state is the internal state of the module. So if you have a form that you want to fill out, you keep all track of that state within that form, whether it's a modal or something, you can keep track of it there. And when any of those things change, it triggers a re-render. So as you type in each character, it's re-rendering, but not really, right? It's only rendering that character that you're adding. So there's a couple weird things, obviously. It has to be. They don't be perfect. So when you set state, it's like an asynchronous call the way it sets state. So you have to set state that way by sending a key value object to it. And then you would get it by saying this dot state dot my key. You can't do it the other way. You can't say this dot state dot my key equals. It doesn't work that way. Getting real issues doing that. So you have to use the set state, and it kind of triggers things that way too. Because you be careful with state and props, because you really want to have that one source of truth. Because when you're debugging, you're like, where is this data coming from? And they're overwriting each other. Like you may be setting your initial state from the props that come into it. You set a form, you're editing something. So you set the initial data into the component. Then you're gonna set that initial data into your component to then work on it. So if that initial data changes somewhere and comes back in again, you kind of got to know what to do with that. Yes, totally. So the main things are, like I said, every component has a render function in it, so that renders the actual things to the DOM, or the virtual DOM. You have to get initial state, so you can set up all your state variables with their initial values. You can define prop types, so you can define the shape of the data that's coming to your component. It's only during development time, like when you're not in prod environment for Node. When you set that, those prop types run, so you'll get alerts in your DevTools saying you didn't pass, this thing should be a string, or you didn't pass the right object here, you didn't pass the required change function or something. And then of course mix-ins, almost every library has them. Some people disagree whether you should actually use them, but in general they provide a nice rich way to share logic amongst components. So prop types, so we kind of talk about them. There's different things you can do with them. You can say if something's supposed to be an array, something's going to be a string, like those basic things. Or you can say it could be a combination. It could be a string, could be a number, could be whatever. Could be an optional, required, you decide in your prop type. Again, this is when you run in production mode, it's removed totally from your bundle. It doesn't add to your bundle, nothing. It's totally taken out. And then you can make custom props. So you can say, you can create a custom function that could be a regular expression or something you want to check that can do that also. So it's kind of cool that you can do those things when you need it. Again, you may not always need that. Certain things you don't care about. If it's just a pure rendering thing, you may not care as long as the basic props are coming in. So that's a React component with some default props, some mix-ins for like a React router. It's hard to build a single page app without routing, right? And then that's how you render. So you create your, so that's one of the weird things, is some words you can't use because it's JavaScript, like the word class. Right, so you have to make these weird trade-offs by saying class name instead, because class would obviously mean something totally weird if you said class, because it would be like, it's JavaScript, right? It's like, why you have a class in the middle of your code? So some things like that, they like warn you about it. I don't know how else they could have tackled it really than that. And then you just curly brace, you want to write whatever you want out to it. Make sense so far? And it creates, that's basically their factory. This is their create class. And then it basically outputs your whatever you need from that.
Is there a reason why they didn't just go with templates instead of just throwing in like the div tag as part of the return?
So you can create your own like components that basically kind of do that if you want, and just you have like children that go in it. Yeah. But the way they looked at it is they didn't want to go the template route. This kind of is a template in a way, right? It just
looks like a template.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just JS. It is kind of a template in a way. Right? It's just different than like mustache or handlebars.
But if they'd done something like an actual template, it would have been handled as a string that's being processed, and then you can use class.
Again, yeah, like it is producing a string in the end anyways.
Yeah.
But if they wanted to be JavaScript, you're limited when it's a JavaScript thing versus a template, right? Sometimes the templates are, so the whole idea is you can lint it, all that stuff like that.
Yeah. You
can't really do that with some of the other templates that I know of, but I don't know why they made the decision.
Yeah, that's because those are not actual strings, those are functions.
Yeah.
So what React does is it actually makes a function tree, so it will literally create a function called div, which you can't do with templates because it has to do string concatenation, and you completely lose the idea of passing a state from top to bottom. Because with passing state from top to bottom, you can only do that with a function
No,
when
it's
you
right.
continuously chain the callbacks together. And that's how it can do DOM differentiation. By chaining the functions together, it can only do that by translating every what looks like a tag into an actual callback.
Like you can write this, that's exactly what I was going to say. Okay. You can write that in pure JavaScript. You can write this in JavaScript if you want. JSX is just a sugar, syntactical sugar for it. You can write it in JavaScript. I don't recommend it. This to me is way easier to understand and read from my point of view. I don't think anyone's actually doing that either. But it's because it turns into JavaScript, so you of course can. Stupid mouse. So different lifecycle methods, and I'll kind of walk through them so we don't have to say. So you can do certain things at certain points in the life cycle of your component. Like you can do things before its initial loads. So if you do server-side rendering, you'll do this, it'll run that life cycle once on server-side and client-side. And so you can do some interesting things there if you want. You want to load some initial data in some JavaScript class somewhere. You can do that. Component did map. So if you have like a rich suite of jQuery widgets, that's where your opportunity is because it's now object to the DOM. So then you can operate on the DOM object. So this is the thing that changes the most. Like React changes the API around that sometimes. It's seen the most changes at least, but that way you can still do the things you did. Like I don't attach IDs to objects anymore. Like any tags don't have IDs anymore. Like you don't need them because it handles that for you. But if you wanted to, so you can just actually call the DOM node you want and then apply some data table or some other widget, some autocomplete or something like that if you want. So you don't have to lose all the things you've done before. You can still use those things. Now I find it still weird to go back to that because there is components that do it in a React way, so it doesn't like manipulate the DOM after rendering. Because it's always like sometimes if you're really fast app, you don't notice that, but sometimes you notice that it changes a little bit once the DOM renders, and like you see a little change to the components. So it kind of gets a little bit through that. So then you get functions when you get new props. So when an owner object passes down data to the child, you have a lifecycle hook there if you want to do some manipulations. And then, yeah, that different things are meant for different. Sometimes you want to change state in one of these functions. Some of them don't let you do that because they're too late in the render cycle. It would cause other side effects. But the other ones, again, you'll have another one where the did update is another version. So the initial time it loads the DOM has a lifecycle method, but you probably have to keep doing that jQuery thing. So every time you update again or it updates the DOM, you have to do that same operation and turn it into your jQuery widget or whatever. And then some of those, I think it's the one before, yeah. So you can then there say compare the previous props to the new props coming in. If they're no different, don't re-render, kind of thing. You don't need to do it often, but if you're supporting old browsers, sometimes you need those optimizations. But I like to kind of do the micro optimizations as late as possible when it actually is a problem, because micro optimized code is not the prettiest thing in the world. And then your unmount. So when your React component leaves a DOM, there's some cleanup things you want to do sometimes. So if you have like a D3 kind of SVG thing going on, you want to unmount it to not have that memory wasting, or you're listening to something, you can end that right there. So I think a couple minutes, I'm just going to get some water, big break, have a slice of pizza, then we'll get in the last part of it. Okay? Make sense?
Yep.